So welcome everybody to today's webinar, our monthly webinar. My name's Dr. Jacquie Jacob. I'm at the University of Kentucky, one of two poultry specialists here. And in addition to my extension role here in the state, I am also the coordinator for the monthly webinars that we do through e-extension. I also maintain the webpage, which you should check out if you get if you haven't done so already. Let me get the address. It has all sorts of articles. It has links to recordings from past webinars. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted along with all the other ones that we have. And it also, we have upcoming webinars. We have planned most of our webinars through to the end of the year. Next month is April 6th on raising Coturnix quail for egg production. Those are Japanese quail, also known as Coturnix quail. So today's webinar is going to look at heavy metals and are they a concern for backyard flocks? Now I'm by myself today, so I'm hosting and presenting. I cannot see the chat box. I can see the Q&A box. So if you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A box. I will be able to see that. And then if it's related to what I'm talking about at the time, I will stop and answer it. Otherwise, I'll hold it till the end and when I can check the chat box. So as I said, today's talk is on heavy metals and backyard flocks. This has been an issue that I've been concerned about for a while, and I'm a little disappointed that other people aren't, especially when you see what's in the literature and the response that some of the literature have had in trying to do interviews with people with backyard flocks. So I wanted to start out with what a definition of heavy metals is. A metal is defined as any element that has a silvery luster. Oh, we have your notes showing, just so you know. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I will. How's that? Is that, are you just seeing the presentation now, or are you seeing the notes as well? So that's better. Okay, we'll see how it goes. Okay, so the heavy metal, any metal that has a silver luster and is a good conductor of heat and electricity. Other terms can be trace metals, transition metals, toxic metals, heavy metals. They're all the same thing. Examples, and the most important one that I'm always concerned about is lead. Chromium is our other ones, arsenic, cadmium, nickel, zinc, copper, mercury, silver, and selenium are other things. Get this to go ahead. Come on. Okay. It's important to know that all soils naturally contain trace levels of metals. The concentrations in uncontaminated soil is primarily related to the geology of the material that the soil was created from. So, you know, these metals do exist in nature. They're not synthetic. They do exist. So, you know, they're going to be there. And it will vary from, you know, one location to another. So here are some averages that are seen around the United States. This is specifically United States. So, you know, aluminum is another one, iron, manganese, copper, chromium, cadmium, zinc. You know, they have various levels that can naturally occur in soil. And it, as I said, will vary from location to location. based on the geography or geology, I guess is a better word. The form of the metals is what can keep it in the topsoil, and the topsoil is what can be a problem. So some studies out of Europe have what originally got me concerned about backyard free range types of production. And they found that chickens foraging on soils contaminated with environmental pollutants accumulated these particular compounds into their eggs, so that home produced eggs were higher in the contamination levels than the commercially produced kept indoor type chickens. Their main concern was dioxins, although they did see some lead as well. So Europe, we know, it has also a different history than we do, with all the things that have gone on with wars and manufacturing, and it's so that was Europe. So I wasn't too sure about here. And you expect it in so-called third world countries. So this study out of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, found that levels of arsenic, mercury, cadmium, and lead in soil led to contamination in edible parts of free-range chickens. So it showed that it was transferable. So the question then becomes, is it a concern in the United States? Do we have those levels of contamination that we have to worry about? And then the same thing in Nigeria. This was near dumpsters. So, these are not, North American situations. So, should we be concerned here or not? Again, this was the Belgium study. They looked at samples of soil, kitchen waste, eggs, feces, all the different types of compounds that they found in the materials that they looked at. And you can see that, lead is, no lead is good. So having lead in there is can be a problem. Some of the other ones as well can be an issue. And some of the things that they looked at, they had specific locations, so that they looked at how much soil do they have exposure to that they might get contaminated. So for example, VB4, they had an outdoor run that was previously a storage yard for building materials and machines. OV3, which is the next one down, that had a little bit less of the lead than the first one, but their neighbor regularly burns plastic in a stove nearby. Then the next one, waste is burned in the garden in the past. The house was previously owned by a painter who they think might have buried paint waste in where the outdoor run for the chickens was now located. And then in a couple of places, household waste was burned in a stove, and the ashes were scattered in the outdoor runs. And the chickens were also fed frying fat, from making French fries and things like that. So they had a number of different factors that they looked at that they felt contributed to the levels of lead and the dioxins and pesticides that they were seeing in the area. And then Australia, you wouldn't think that Australia would be a big problem, but in New South Wales in Australia, they looked at 26 backyard chicken coops, and they looked at the levels of arsenic, cadmium, copper, and zinc in the soil and the eggs. They found that they were low, but there were it was high in 7 of the sites. And so that in those sites, homegrown eggs, the level of lead was higher than in commercial eggs. And they found that it was correlated to the levels in the soil. So the higher the level in the soils, the higher the level in the eggs, assuming the chickens had access to the soil. This one is in New Zealand, in Auckland. And again, they looked at exposure. All eggs showed evidence of lead exposure. The yolk concentrations, went from almost not detectable to, 1.07 milligrams per kilogram. Eggshells, you wonder, well, why would you even worry about eggshells? But eggshells can be used in compost, which then goes on to, if you're raising vegetables, or if you're feeding them back to the chickens as a source of calcium, then you are, continuing to build up the exposure. And so the concentrations were higher in hens on properties that were built before 1941. And they were, if they had weatherboard homes versus brick homes. And United States, we've done pretty good trying to get rid of our sources of lead. So in 78, I think we banned the use of lead into paints. Yes, 1978, we banned lead in paints, but exposure to chips of lead-based paint can be a problem if they have if they have the old building materials. And then we also, in 1996, we banned lead gasoline. So areas that had heavy traffic before that time, when the lead was still in the gasoline, can have areas. So in 2003, a small farm in Iowa, they had clinically normal chickens, but they noticed that they had been exposed to chips of lead-based paint. And so they sent in samples of the chickens and the eggs for analysis, and they found high blood levels. They found it in the yolk, they found it in the shell, they found it in the kidneys, in the livers, and the muscles. So if you're eating the chickens, you could get some. So although these are parts per billion, any level that can build up in children can be particularly bad. So that this one was New York City. They did a community garden. This was trying to improve the health of the people by having a community garden, which is great, but they found levels of lead in the soil, which led to lead in the eggs that were being produced. So again, it can be an issue. Doesn't mean it's going to be an issue, but it can be an issue. The CDC in 2014 estimated that 500,000 children in the US between the ages of 1 and 5 have blood levels of lead above the 5 micrograms per deciliter, which is the reference level at which public health becomes action plans become initiated. But in reality, no safe lead levels in children have ever been identified. So any lead in the blood of children is bad. So trying to do whatever we can to avoid it is extremely important. So this study is from Boston, Massachusetts. So, we're into the United States now. We're not talking about a foreign country. Okay, do we know what a toxic level is for lead in a chicken? In there is that all of the chickens that have been analyzed in all of my studies have been clinically fine. They haven't shown any toxicity, but they were producing the eggs. And again, the effect of lead or any of the other elements on humans depends on age. And I'm more particularly interested in the children. There is no level of lead that is safe for children. So, so I don't know how to answer that question because there isn't anything is bad. So there isn't really a toxic level. Increasing levels of lead can lead to problems with brain function so that the children get slower and slower in school. They have, problems concentrating, things like that. I think you had, yeah. Okay. Okay, so this study was in Boston, Massachusetts, 49 households that 49 households that had backyard chicken eggs. And again, the mean egg lead concentration was correlated with the lead concentration in the soil in the coop. So the household size ranged from 1 to 4. The number of chickens on the property went from 2 to 21. The eggs per week that a family might eat went from 8 to 68. And then toddlers, the toddlers under 3 years were eating anywhere from 0 to 4 eggs a week, young children 3 to 7, so that they're, looking at the mean egg lead concentrations. As I said, anything that they can detect is too high. The level of detection is 1.4 parts per billion. And they were getting, levels above that. So you need to, I think it's a concern that we need to think about. In California, they screened the livers from 1,476 chickens that were submitted to the diagnostic lab between the years 2015 and 2016. Excuse me. With this study, I was a little disappointed it took that long for them to publish it, since they were finding that there were lead concentrations in the livers of the chickens. They followed up with the families that had submitted. So these are chickens that died for some reason. It does not necessarily have to be lead poisoning, but they died and were submitted to the diagnostic lab to try and find out what was wrong with them. And then as a side project, they analyzed the lead content of all the livers from the chickens that were submitted. And for 45 of them, they found high levels of concentrations of lead. So they followed up with the families to try and look at, what led to those high levels and to recommend things to do to prevent it for children. And there were families that they tried to follow up with that were not interested. So, it's like, if you have if it's a possibility that your children are at risk, why would you not follow up? And so how do we get contamination into those eggs, right? So we get lead-based paints, as I said, were banned in 1978, but there are a lot of old construction materials lying around, especially if you're trying to build like one of the hoop houses that you see in my background. I've seen people use a lot of old doors that they find in, old construction sites or um, old lots that they reuse for their chickens. So if those are coming from, houses prior to 1978, that can be a concern. If the house that was on the lot was built before 1978, demolished, and a new house was built, then um, was the soil that was there on that lot mediated so that it would not have any heavy metals in it from the previous construction? You can get heavy metals from automotive batteries that are not disposed of properly. You can get lead from fish sinkers. Shotgun pellets was a problem. One of the studies that I read, the house used to be on a shooting range, and there was a lot of bullets or pellets lying around that the chickens could get at, and some of them did, and they were found in the gizzard. Um, if you're near a lead mine, of course. Oil and gasoline, yes, they banned it before 1996, but if you had heavy traffic areas prior to the withdrawal of the lead, you can have it in the soils. There is some contaminated, lead contaminated pottery and jewelry, so that if those are lying around, they can contaminate the soil. And they used to use lead-based inks in food packaging, such as candy wrappers. So, I mean, those types of things can get in and cause a problem. And one of the things I said, why worry about lead in eggshells? This particular study looked at the levels of lead in yolk and albumin versus the shell. So they separated them out, thinking, you don't eat the shell, but many backyard gardeners will use their compost to fertilize their gardens. And then if lead containing shells are placed in the compost pile and used in growing edible plants like leaves or whatever, then there's the potential for uptake of the lead by the plants. And if the chickens, as I said, are fed the leftover eggshells as a calcium source, which we do recommend, it's a good idea. Why waste the calcium? Feed it back to your chickens. But if they are, if they have lead in them, you're re-exposing them to the lead. So you need to be concerned about all aspects, not just what you can eat. So the question was, are heavy metals a concern for backyard flocks? And I think the answer is yes, they can be. That does not mean that they definitely will be. It just means that they could be. So one of the studies that I read, as I know we have somebody from Colorado, was about Pueblo, Colorado. They have a real problem in the soil in the area there that was contaminated with lead and other heavy metals that were getting into the eggs that the people were eating. So that was an issue for the people there in Colorado. I've seen it for some areas in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure about North Carolina, but I would imagine there are some areas there too. So the thing to do is to think about, what was on the land before you put the chicken coop there. And if there was old construction, if there was old pottery, if there was anything like that, then, be careful. That's us. I mean, that's all I could, that's, you know, it, it's a short webinar today, but I just want people thinking about, and I would like to see, and I've been trying to push it here in Kentucky to get the Department of Health to test soil and eggs from backyard flocks in areas, because it is not just an urban thing. It is also rural areas. And as we start going to more free range type chickens, what was on that land before we put free range chickens on them? Yes, if you are in a highly industrialized area with a lot of mills and manufacturing plants, there is a concern. I would get your soil tested. Um, and you have to have a specific type of test. The typical test, if you send in your soil to a typical soil lab like we have here at the University of Kentucky, they're used to analyzing soil so to tell you what fertilizer to put on it, not to tell you about heavy metals. Because if you have a lot of mills and manufacturing plants, it could be something other than lead that may be of an issue for it. Um, there are there are labs that do it. I can't think of them offhand, but when I was trying to put together a grant proposal, our lab here at University of Kentucky can't do it. They only do for people who want to get their soil tested to figure out what level of fertilizer to add. I would test your soil first. If you don't have a problem with your soil, that you're not going to, unless it's in your water, which I don't think that would be happening, but um, I would get the soil that the birds are on. So test inside where the coop is. Um, you can't really test, well, I guess you could take blood samples, but it's a little harder to take the blood sample from a chicken. You can, but have to find some place that do it. Would you recommend soil testing for lead if you have concerns or know of an old structure? Yes. Yes. It isn't very mobile. It will stay in your topsoil. And yeah, you can move the coop to an area that doesn't have, the lead. Um, will it drop in your chickens? Good question. Most of the time, it, the fact that it's going into the eggs is their way of getting rid of it. So it may actually decrease in time, but I think it would take a while. So I will look up all the when I post the video of this on YouTube, and when I put it up on Facebook um, with the recording, I will try and find places nationally that that do soil testing um, for lead and other heavy metals. So this is if you don't know it, this is our e-extension Facebook page. And I will post it there when I get it. And for those that are in Kentucky and have come here through the Kentucky Facebook page, that's my Kentucky Facebook page. I will find out who does it, does the testing. If you're on well water, if you're drinking the well water, you need to know that what water that you're drinking is safe. So if it's got heavy metals and you're drinking it, I mean, that's worse than going through the bird first. So if you think that there's any chance that you could have contamination and you have children, please get it tested. Especially if you have, manufacturing or milling or, had any gasoline. Oh, I didn't post it. Sorry, I posted it to myself. That was kind of stupid. Sorry about that. there we go. That one is my Kentucky one. I didn't click the right thing. That is the e-extension one. And this is our general web page that has various articles. And I am working on an article on the lead, excuse me, and I will be citing the sources for the research and where they get their stuff tested as well. So it's a short webinar today. It's only 30 minutes, so it's not too bad. It was a very specific topic, wanting to make sure that people look at, you know, if it's an issue in your area or not. And if you're an extension agent, you should be looking to see, you know, what areas around you could be of a concern. And yeah, I think we need more extension to the backyard flocks to make sure that they're, you know, not making their kids sick. Okay. So thank you guys for coming. As I said, the next webinar is April the 6th, and it's on raising Coturnix quail for egg production. We have one coming up on backyard flocks, home remedies, what you should and shouldn't do, raising ducks for meat production, whether or not to vaccinate your chickens, preparing for winter, and on raising guinea fowls. So if you have any topics that you don't see a recording for or an upcoming webinar, email me and I will make sure we get one. Guineas, yes, that one's on October 5th, 3 p.m. So thank you guys for coming. If there's no more questions, that's all I have. If you find out that your area has a lead problem or a heavy metal problem in general, please let me know. I would like to be able to share that with other people in your area and with people in, oh, I missed a question from Nita. How do you know if feed or bedding for chickens have lead in them? Your feed most likely does not have it. Bedding depends on what your material is. If it's straw or hay and it's grown on contaminated soil, it could maybe. And depending on what kinds of pine shavings or what kinds of shavings you have. But I don't think that the bedding should be an issue, but it depends on what it is. So it's kind of hard to say. So I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you guys for coming.